Right, so the basics, back to the start. We're going to go on a bit of a journey to start with. So the current GCSE, where we are sat right now in 2023, we call still the new GCSE. It's not new at all, it's been around since 2017. But between 2017 and today, there was obviously 2 years, 2 summer sittings that did not happen. So very much so, even experienced members of the team, experienced members of school are still calling the 9 to 1 new. In 2015, when they announced the changes and what was happening, it was probably the 3rd or 4th that I'd been through. And we're just going to have a very quick whirlwind history lesson of where we've come from and probably where a lot of us in the room have sat at GCSE as a student compared to what it sits looking like now. So the changes that happened in 2015 are in place now. Prior to that, I remember it was for the 2012 exam. So 2012, we're going back a fair whack now. And they announced all the changes going around 2010, 2011. And I was nervous. I was nervous for these changes. The samples and the assessment examples that are out there look tough. And it was all about problem solving. So 2012 exam was about really bringing in more problem solving into the exams. And I remember the sample assessment material that was there, and the aim was to share it with the year 11s and get them prepared, or the year 10s, getting them prepared for the first exam in 2012. And I remember, it was like it was yesterday, utilising the resources, the questions that were there, putting them in front of my exam groups. The kids didn't have a clue, trying to get these problem-solving questions into the lessons and talking them through. Kids they just didn't know how to start them. And then in 2012, this was the question. So a lot of teachers still remember Mr. Weaver's Garden. And this was the example of the problem-solving question that was landing. Other than this one question in the exams, they were very similar to what was there before. So a massive part of me was relieved. We didn't have a huge change. There was still a lot of stuff that we knew what to expect. It was very similar, apart from these starting to land. And they were called QWC questions. Quality of written communication was required within the student's answer. So they'd put the maths down, answer the question, but leave a bit of a story, an evidence, a sentence, a summary of what that answer is. And that quality of written communication was highlighted with the asterisks, and you can see it there on the number 5. So this was question 5 on the higher paper. And that meant, so the students were pre-warned, looking at that question, they will get a mark within that question, that answer, for their written communication. Now, quality of written communication is still there. It's expected more now. It's no longer explicitly requested. So looking at that question now, I don't think we are scared by it. We're not put off teaching that type of ilk of question, but very much that is when it started, 2012, this type of problem-solving, juicy question, 4 or 5 marker maybe. So other than that, 2012, yeah, pretty much the same. Prior to that, or around that period of time, not only was the new GCSE landing in 2012, but we had students sitting multiple entries. It didn't have to be at the end of year 11. So I was utilising that opportunity with my students, and not all of them, and definitely not as a get a GCSE and finish your GCSE Maths in year 9. So we had some year 9 students sitting, some year 10. There was the November sitting in year 11, but there was also the March sitting that was there for 2012, 2013, I think it was. So there's multiple stabs at getting that grade C at the time on their build-up in secondary school. And I know a lot of schools utilised it probably in the wrong way. And what they did was, when the students got their grade C, move on, do a different subject, move on to English, try and pass that, whatever, and finish their maths early, and that got it a bad name. We never did that. We pushed it right to the end, and with the aim of getting a much better grade at the end of year 11. But knowing we'd bagged them that qualification, that pass. And this was I suppose, the context we were in. We very much utilised that. certain students fell off, disappeared, whatever, and hopefully helping their life chances. But that was no more. And you can't, to this day, sit the exam other than at the end of year 11 if it was to count on the school's league tables. So I know it's possible, but very much not done or utilised within schools. And I see why. Now, the March sit-in that was brought in has actually left a legacy, a massive legacy. Most schools that I speak to, I know of, and again, in the room here, even just with a show of hands, it'll be interesting to see, do we do a second mock for year 11s around that period of time in your school? So the February-March period, I think there's a few hands popping up already. Yes, that was the legacy of what happened when that was a real sitting. And I think that's a great legacy. That's a period of time where you can really go, here we go, this is what it's going to look like one more time. Whether it's going to make any difference in terms of predictions or grades for the students at that point, I think it's a great opportunity for them to see, without it being the real thing in that summer, this is what it's like with not a great deal of time in between them. So the March sitting is still there to this day. Prior to that, we had modular exams, and that was ripped away pretty sharpish, pretty quick. Only a couple of year groups that went through the modular system. I wasn't a big fan of it anyway. I did not like it. There was a couple of different versions out there. So OCR had their graduated assessments, and then the OCR route A is linear, route B was modular. So they had two different routes through, and the modular route was quashed and disappeared. But we did actually try it as a trial within our school. I said I didn't want to use it. I was much more a fan of the linear model anyway. There was a group, or one of my groups did trial it in year 10. And I think the first module you did was data handling. And it was a lovely module, worked a treat. Students loved it. And it set them up for a big false sense of security that the whole of the GCSE was like that. And then they thought, oh, I don't need to do any work. That first module was okay. And then the next one was the algebra module. And that really hit home what kind of work you had to do. So the modular system didn't last the test of time, really. Prior to that, we had the intermediate paper. So there was 3 exams to choose from for the sit-in for those students, whether it was foundation, intermediate or higher. When these new GCSEs were mooted around in 2015 about what was coming, I know there was a massive call at that period of time to bring the intermediate papers back. They were good. It filled that gap in between, I must admit. It was a good judge of that middle attainment area of students. And you can still get these papers to this day on the Emporium. And I'll talk about the Emporium a little bit later on. But it's a free bank of resource. And even if you are not a Pearson Centre, you can get a login for that Emporium. Just request it when you go onto the Emporium webpage. And you can see some of the intermediate papers there. And that does give you a great indication as a practitioner, as a teacher in the classroom, the ilk of maths that sits in between that higher and the foundation. Be careful. Some of the maths that was there at that point is no longer part of the assessment objectives anymore. For example, questionnaires you'll see on those exam papers no longer exist within the syllabus, the specification. A couple of others may, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, going back a few years. Moving averages, great maths, but no longer there in the GCSE at the moment. Stratified sampling, I think, there we go. So finally, in the history lesson, coursework. Any teachers in the room right now that remembers doing their GCSE maths coursework, either as a teacher or as a student themselves? Yeah, here we go. I remember it. I remember it well. I remember being told what to put down as a student, this is. And did it actually help me get there through the GCSE? I don't think it did. I taught the final 2 years of my teaching career. Sorry, the first 2 years of my teaching career was the final 2 years of the coursework. I was not a fan of it. Not a fan of teaching it, not a fan of doing it. Did I get through to the students what I wanted them to learn in that forum? I don't think I did. Much better to be teaching them and showing them the real life rather than forcing to get something down on paper to tick a box for coursework. But in saying that, if you can still get hold of, and a lot of departments have got it, it's got a green cover on. There was a file of all the different options for the coursework in a non-coursework environment. Key stage 3 in particular, I'm thinking here for some of the challenges they were great, or are great, challenges to do over a period of time with the students, but not with that hanging over your head of a deadline to get coursework done. So I would heavily advise trying to find that document if you can. Green, thick book, green cover, and the one that a lot of schools used up and down the country was the Mayfield High School Data Coursework Project. And I think that was the one I did myself as a student. So, current exams. They are called 1MA1. That's the Edexcel Pearson code. That's the GCSE Maths. The / and then the 1F after it is meaning paper 1 foundation. Obviously, then paper 1 for higher is 1H. The students sit 3 90-minute papers. The first paper is non-calculator and the second 2 are calculator papers. Now, this does vary across the exam boards. So I know that the WJEC, the Welsh board, they have 2. They don't have 3 papers. They've got 2. There's been tweaks over the period of time since 2015 from all the exam boards. So I know one of the exam boards used to utilise multiple choice explicitly as part of their starting questions. They no longer have those, but they do look slightly different. They all form a slightly different picture of the same specification, the same off-qual requirements. But they do look slightly different. So Pearson, 3 90-minute papers, first 1 non-calculator, second 2 calculator. Whether that's done on purpose, I do not know. I always say that to the students, why is the first 1 non-calculator? And they all haven't got a clue. And I say, in case you forget your calculator to paper 1, it's already, you remember it for papers 2 and 3. 80 marks for each paper, so totaling 240. Now, my son has just sat his GCSE in the summer. He's in year 12 now, but he was in year 11 last year. If anyone has a slight interest, I will let you know what he scored out of 240. You've got to remember to ask at the end when I can see the chat, and I'll let you know what he scored out of 240. I'm a very proud dad. I couldn't let my head be held high in the local area, because it is the local area, being a maths teacher as well. So I'm very proud of that. I'll tell you later. The front covers look like this. Obviously, if it's got the calculator strike through, it's the non-calculator paper. And what they're allowed to use is clearly on the front of that exam. One big hint here, guys. Get the kids seeing what these look like as early as possible. I know there's a big no-no of GCSE talk at Key Stage 3, but as you're approaching the end of year 9, middle of year 9 onwards, show the students what they're looking for at the end game. It's amazing how the talk of the font, the dotted lines, the look of the papers, if you're drilling it in as long as you possibly can over a course of time, that's a comfort blanket for students. It's a comfort blanket for us as teachers, what we know, what we expect. Now, that's not me saying don't use other exam boards papers. I love using every single bit of maths I can get my hands on. I love utilising whatever I can find as a good maths question. But that comfort blanket of preparing them for that Pearson exam, what it looks like, the layout, the organisation, the font, started early. Massive hint there. Couple of dates for you, whether you've looked at them or not. There's your dates for summer 24 papers. We have the 16th of May. In between the 16th of May and the second paper is half term. Then you've got the 3rd of June and the 10th of June. So you've got 2 Monday morning exams next summer. And anything like me, guys, I've got year 11 period 1 on a Monday at the moment. They're half asleep on that slot for their lesson. We've got to be homing it in now and reminding them now that their exams are on these days of the week. Monday does make a massive difference. And the frustrating bit for me as a teacher, and I haven't actually explained where I'm from or what I do. I'll do that in a second. My group, my year 11, we have a double Monday, period 1 and 5. So notoriously the toughest slots of the week. Monday, they're half asleep after the weekend. And then Monday period 5, they're back full awake after being asleep all morning on Monday. So the toughest periods of the week. And then that Monday morning, they've got their maths exam in the summer. So I'm homing it in now on those students. Don't forget, don't forget. I've put it in red. All of them are in the morning. I'm not saying they always are and always will be, but the maths exams generally have been given the slots first thing in the morning. I do believe that's down to they're more alert. It's a better period of time to do a maths exam, or it possibly could be the exam boards just try and fill and put the maths in there in the morning first. I don't know the real reason, but they are all in the morning. They generally are in the morning. The November sitting, don't forget those for your research students as well. And there's the dates at the bottom. So you've got the 8th, 10th and 13th of November, a much closer period of time for those research exams. You do have them spread out a little bit more in the summer. Like I said, the half term is in between the first and the second papers. Get to know your exam officer and whoever is that person that has the link to the Pearson portal. Who is it in your school that does that upload of these are the students that does higher, does foundation? And I'm not saying for any reason to overstep your head of department. It's just good to know who that person is. Speaking to your head of department, the exam officer, about the exams, the process, how do they go in, what happens. I've been in this game a long time, and I started teaching back in 2004, 2003, 2004. I've been a head of department for most of that period of time, lead practitioner, head of department, and I think head of department's my favourite job out of the lot in terms of getting the results for a school. But I learned something brand spanking new this year in terms of a paper was given an average grade between, I believe it either went missing between us and the school or at the marking centre, I don't know. And the process that paper went through to make sure that student wasn't penalised. So I've learned something completely new this year. It was only a few years back knowing about the students that could have the enlarged print paper. Now we had a set of twins that relied on wearing glasses, didn't always wear glasses. In fact, it was very hard to say, are you wearing your glasses today? They generally did not rock up to school with them. But there was also a dyslexia with both of them, or a dyscalculia. I don't think it was ever formally diagnosed. But we went to the route in maths, no other subjects, enlarging their working lessons, and it worked for them. Just seemed to click. And then we found out actually there is an enlarged version of the exam for those students. So that helped them out, and learning these little bits about the end game of the exam by speaking to the exam officer, speaking to your head of department, and just having the conversations within school. Because if it's took me till this year to know about the process for that paper, but also within the last couple of years to know about the modified version of the exams, it's good to talk. That's all I'm saying. It's good to talk there. Mark schemes. Now, any person, no matter the position in their career, when you're given that first year's job and then that 20th year job of marking some mocks, some internal assessments, we print the mark schemes. Now, the clever people will print from page 4 onwards, so they don't see all of this, or save some printing and don't have to look at all this. The other people will print it off and then just flick straight past it. I can't emphasize enough the importance of knowing what these first few pages say. It really dictates and sets out a stall for what to expect when you open up that first page of the mark scheme. I don't mean what the codes necessarily are, although it is useful to know what the codes are. For example, M for method mark, for P for process mark, the OE, the or equivalent, FT for follow through. So if they've done something wrong on the first part and then brought that error through, but then they've done a good bit of maths with that error, they can still get their follow through. So looking for the FT, but knowing the codes, but knowing inside out what these parts mean when the students does something. So crossed out work, for example. Please, please, please get to know the start of the mark scheme now. It's very easy to get to that first set of mocks, first set of papers. The head of department plonks them in front of you. Right, got to get marking these. There's your mark scheme. Just take a few minutes to look at the very first few pages. Vital. And we do talk about this a bit more when we get to that marking session, which is in a couple of months' time, I think. It may be worth considering now in your careers or in your position at school to be an examiner. Now, this is not a sales plug to get any of you guys to be examiners, but I tell you what, it does get you to know the mark scheme inside out. It gets you to know the understanding of how students should work, and everything benefits your teaching. Knowing inside out, that's worth 4 marks, but you get 3 marks if you do this. And those kind of conversations with your students is the best in terms of preparing them for their exams. But they buy into you as a teacher more because you know it all. You know how these work. And I remember that eureka moment for me, and it doesn't exist anymore. Trial and improvement was the question. Using trial and improvement, work out an estimate 2, and it was brilliant. And knowing how to lay it out perfectly for the students to make sure everyone got the 3 out of the 4 marks, the final answer got the 4 marks. I think it was my game-changing moment as a teacher, and that was only because I became an examiner early on in my career. I've had a few years out, and I'm hopefully on the waiting list to go back in again next year. I quite fancy doing it again. Once you're in, then you're into the mark scheme after the first couple of pages and looking out for those codes throughout, whether it's a method mark, a process mark, whether it's worth 2 of the marks, whether you can get the mark for correct answer only. Spend a bit of time getting to know the mark scheme inside out and read those first couple of pages. So mark schemes, grade boundaries. The grade boundaries change every single year. Don't be pulled into conversations with the department, I suppose, but more so the students. What is it, sir, I need to get to pass? You sharing that knowledge of, well, actually, I can't give you that definitively. I can give you an idea of where it was last year, but I can also give you an idea of where it was the year before in November sitting, and share with students how they change over time, how they change depending on how the exam was. If nationally that exam was found very, very well and a lovely sitting for most students, that means the marks were up for grabs a little bit easier maybe than one sitting, the grade boundaries go up. When those tough papers, some people find generally across the country find, that will affect the grade boundaries. So we've got to have that conversation with the students that it's not a number that you're aiming for. You're aiming to do the best you possibly can on all 3 papers. And then if we can get past a certain line that may be the highest it's been in a few years, that's what we tend to do. Look at the highest it's been, and we smash past that number. That's how we get to the pass. That's how we get to the grade 4 or get to the grade 5 or even get to the grade 7, 8, 9. So just knowing that, and again, sharing with the students, the grade boundaries are different over time, and sharing them, and maybe even going back and looking at what the papers look like. With those 2 years that have been out, 2020 and 2021, have I got that right? Yes. There's not a huge pot to go back and look at, but what has changed, look back at 2017 papers and compare them to today. I'm not saying they're easier. I'm not saying they're better. What I'm saying is they have settled down because it was a significant change. I introduced this whole, so Mal just at the very start going through the history lesson, going back to those 2012 papers. And I remember at the time being worried the papers were going to be horrendous based off what was being produced, and then they weren't. So that was in the back of my mind all the way through the changes for these 9-to-1 papers. But then when they did land in 2017, my word, they were different. They were completely different.
On the grade boundaries, I found it very freeing from in June 2017, from when students were saying, how many marks do I need? How many marks I need? Whereas before you'd go, oh, it's roughly this. And it would to be able to swan around. And I did literally feel like I was swanning around my classroom saying, I don't know, who cares? Let's just go for as many marks as we can, and not being constrained by, oh, it's 35 a paper, it's 45 a paper. It was just, I don't know, let's just get as many as we can. Would you agree, Seeger?
Yeah, and that's become the legacy now, hasn't it? We just say,
Yes.
we like to give them percentages because they, in your head, you're chasing 100% when it becomes a percentage. When it's out of 80, you lose sight of where that end point is. You don't think of 80 as the end. So percentage, we're aiming for a high percent. Keep going, bigger percentage next time. And okay, we can, if we want to, go back and say, like Mal said, yeah, we need to get past here, but realistically, we're just trying to get as many marks as we can all the way through years 9, 10, 11, whenever you start that GCSE course, to when you sit it in the summer.
And then a word of warning about grade boundaries is that they do change every sitting. They also change per exam board. So there will be people that will say, oh, this exam board's easier, this exam board, because it's only this many marks. But we'd be wary of that kind of conversation because the students need to be prepared well for whichever exam board, and we shouldn't be getting into the games. And it is a bit of a myth because of the way it is all calculated and the grade boundaries are placed. So just be careful of that. And I'm going to refer to a conversation. I've said this once this week already to another bunch of colleagues, that back in the very early days of my career, I remember he wasn't old at the time, Graham Cumming, whereas I was saying, I want low grade boundaries. And it was very naive in my naivety because I wanted more kids to get their grade C in those days. He was like, but surely you want higher grade boundaries because that means the kids know more maths. Because the higher grade boundaries, the same number of students will still pass there or thereabouts, with some caveats like the national reference test. But we want higher grade boundaries because it shows that they needed to know more maths to pass. And he was right, because that's what we got into this game for, was about passing on that body of knowledge. And he was very right. And I'm now coming round to that idea, not necessarily high all the time. So yeah, it's just an interesting sort of mindset to change, that at the end of the day, we prepare the kids well and the grade boundaries will fall into it's irrelevant.
This document, it does say on the, you can't quite see on that photo there because it's got all my scribbles and notes and tea stains, but that the proof is in the pudding there. I use that document and I use it a lot. It says 2015 on the front of it, so don't think that's the old one. It was produced in 2015 for the first sitting of this 9-to-1 GCSE in 2017, and it is your go-to. What's in foundation, what's in higher, what's in both. And that is not Edexcel, Pearson, that's not any exam board, that's from the DFE. That's the GCSE subject content and assessment objectives. I would advise any teacher, new, experienced, whatever, to have a copy of that at hand on their desk at school. It is a go-to to make sure, even just in those moments of madness where you want to ask yourself, does this appear? And it was even within the last couple of years that we've come across the word surds in there. And I bounced it back to the exam boards. What is it? What the word surds for both higher and foundation? And it came back as in more along the lines of leave your answer in terms of pi when it's to do with circles. So that ilk of question, but that document is great, and it is well used. It's there. I dip into it, and I'd say that to any person at any point in their career.
And then again, dictated by Ofqual, the DFE, is the content areas. So every examination sittings, the 3 exams have to be made up of these percentages of content. So 25%, which is why it is different for the tiering. So foundation tiering will have 25% number, whereas the higher only has 15% number. And we've just had a question on the chat talking about placing kids for tiering. It is a bigger conversation than sort of a Zoom conversation about getting tiering right. So, but go back to these content areas. We've got the 6 areas. Relatively important, those number, algebra, ratio, proportion differences. The fact that 30% of higher is algebra, and it feels like it when you see the papers, which you consider the teaching that goes along that to prepare the students is 30% of it algebra based. Similarly, if the end goal is 15% of the examination is probability and statistics, how much of our teaching time is allocated to it? It is important for me to have that kind of feel. But not only those content areas, we've also got assessment objectives. So, and I remember this is for me, I think is quite refreshing from a professional development point of view. You go into any other subjects, they talk about AO1 and AO2. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, as a collective maths teachers, an exam was an exam. We weren't that au fait with the different assessment objectives. So once the content objectives have been hit, they then have to, and again, not Pearson, this is all the boards, have to hit specific assessment objectives. Depends on the tier. So 50% of foundation is what we call AO1, use and apply and just do it. What's 38%? Or write 38% as a decimal. And again, you can feel that in the paper that it is different, that 50% of it's is more recall, using it, like we say, using and applying. Then you've got your AO2, which is your reasoning, interpreting and communicating. Again, slightly different between higher and foundation. And then the last one is your problem solving. So 30% of the higher tier will be based on problem solving. And just a word of warning on that, that it can be in maths contents, but also in familiar and unfamiliar contexts, which is why there is, in most papers, there's always a bit of a twisty one at the end, which I think is great for our top kids. And all the boards have to adhere to these different tick lists, I suppose they are. That's a massive difference from the previous GCSE. But trying to tick, not only have I got 15% probability, but have I got 50% AO1 style questions, it is a mammoth task to bring those papers together. But again, not dictated by each individual board, and all the boards should be ticking those same boxes over a smaller number series as possible. So it does get monitored, but you might find that one paper out of a series of, I don't know, 2 sit-ins, say 6 papers, might feel slightly different. You're never going to get exactly 50% in every sit-in. So there is a little bit of leeway that it's allowed over a certain number of sit-ins. I'm hoping that makes sense. And we've said about the fact that all the boards have to adhere to that. So they had that content document, the one with Seeger's coffee stained documents, the lovely one. Within that, all the boards back in 2015, before the new GCSE, and for every other GCSE and every other subject, there's some allowable interpretation of, as you would do if you had a group of mathematicians, about what maths to include in an exam. How you interpret statistical diagrams might be different to the next mathematician. And it's not just statistical diagrams. So there is some slight differences. Pearson have produced these documents that show the differences between Pearson and the 2 main boards, showing it as additional content or variation in contents, because there is some slight differences. So if you're used to a different board, it's worth knowing that, for example, that Pearson doesn't have weak and strong correlation when it comes to scatter graphs. They're only bothered about that it's positive and negative, whereas other boards might say, no, we want students to know about weak and strong positive correlation. That's not to say we wouldn't teach it, because I still think it's part of what we teach. It's just to know that it may not get examined. So again, really good documents if you're interested in what other boards do or have come from another board, or if it's just trying to get your head around some of the subject content as well.
I think going back to the point I mentioned earlier about utilising questions, show students maths, do maths in the classroom. And if you can have those conversations about, actually, this is on this board exam paper, but this is not on our one that we're using, or those kind of conversations, is really powerful with those students. They buy into you for knowing everything about what they're going to do when they're in year 11, at the end of year 11. Little things to remember, again, the conversations to have with those students, working out space, lines, and this doesn't just boil down to exams and exam boards. When you go online and find some resources, or you download a resource, or you find something, you go, oh, I like that. When there's space or lines or a different font or whatever it is that's different, that's when you have the conversation. You bring it up. Don't assume the students are sitting there completely comfortable that you've given them a question that has working out space and no line, or a small line at the bottom, or loads of lines. And that comes in with a very old bearings question that Mel was forced to upgrade for me and find it again. But the question had about 3 lines of writing space for a question that was work out the bearing of. And I think it was an old question that I'd found somewhere. But every student, or so many lines, when all I'm writing down is a number. And it is those conversations you can say, actually, this, where I got this from, just gave you that as space. And it is that, again, knowing inside out what the end game is. But when you find in a resource or an exam question or whatever, you're bringing that up there and then, and always making that reference back to what it is at the very, very end. Multiple choice, I know I've mentioned it already. Multiple choice is there. Whether anyone says otherwise, it is there. It's there on all exam papers somewhere. It may be as explicit as what is the option, A, B, C, or D, or down to the point of popping a symbol in a box or matching up an equation to a graph image. They are multiple choice. They are worthy of a guess. So as a student, as a teacher marking, nothing gets more frustrating than when a student leaves that kind of question blank and says don't know, when they could just put absolutely anything in. The amount of students I've just marked some papers where it had the equation of 4 lines and 4 graphs, and they had to match them up to the letters of A, B, C, D of the graphs. And students said, I just didn't know. I didn't know. Well, we'll have a guess. But then Mal has got this massive, I suppose, idea or vision of what the data we could get from any kind of multiple choice.
And I think, yeah, so multiple choice is brilliant diagnostically, but also one of the health warnings I would usually do if I hadn't had massive technical issues at the beginning is talk about context and the kind of students that myself and Tiga have spent years teaching. Is that for the kind of borderline students that I teach, if ever you look at multiple choice and the research behind it, there's the power of distractors, and very cleverly sculpted multiple choice questions. Those CD borderline students will just automatically go for the distractor, which is one thing to be aware of. But also then the issue Sega's got of them not having a go is diagnostically getting no answers doesn't tell you anything. I don't want them to guess. What I want them to do is to tell me they don't know so I can do something about it. So when I've used the multiple choice questions from the Emporium, and there's an old GCSE, an old qualification that had a multiple choice paper, I've then handwritten a don't know column on the end, because that to me diagnostically gives me so much information, because what I do with a kid that doesn't know is genuinely different to a kid that has left it blank because he's being lazy. It's almost like your demeanor changes as well when you deal with those kind of students. So just if you're using them in your teaching, just add a little don't know column and just say, look, if you don't know, just tell me. It's not an issue. We deal with it.
The foundation papers, very much a nurtured start. They're ranked in difficulty. The first 5 questions or first 5, 6 questions around there are always designed to be those AO1s, the recall questions, 1 mark as we call them. And we set up as teachers a bit of a unwritten competition from day 1 of year 10, I'd say. Our aim is to not lose a mark on the first double page of the foundation paper. And we set that out as our stall from day 1. And we're constantly drilling that in. Our starters, our plenaries, our conversations and questioning around the classes is always very much around that revision and constant repetition of these ilk of questions. So we really want to build up. There's more than one reason. Obviously, results, the more marks you can possibly get. But more importantly, if they start that paper well, they will go on and do well through the paper. They'll have more confidence. They'll have a go at more things. They'll have that buzz feeling, like we all do when we see something we like, to have a go and go a little bit further. And that's why we do it. And we set out that stall early. So the foundation paper is very much like that. On the Emporium, or if you want me to email them to you, whatever, just keep in touch and I can do that. If you can't find them, is a bank of all of the 1 marker questions since 2017 papers, all of them. as starters. So they're all in one place, and you can utilize those as you see fit, or put them in the visualizer, all the one markers that have cropped up in one place, and it really does work well. And then knowing how these build up in difficulty, ramping up towards the end of the paper. And then there is this rule of the very final question is not a higher question. It's not on the higher paper. And I suppose there's a few different reasons there. And I think Mal likes to think to encourage them to keep going to the end.
Yeah, I'm Miss Positivity. So the idea is that they do get more difficult throughout the paper, but the last 7, 8, 9 questions will then be the start of the higher. But the last question on foundation is never, sometimes 2, never included as part of those common assessed items. And it is, I think, to keep them going, and there is something there for everybody. But whilst we say they're ramped in difficulty, sometimes students might perform contrary to what you'd expect them to. And so a question that we would have thought, that Pearson would have thought, oh, it's the 13th most difficult question, we'll put in 13th place. And then students nationally, for whatever reason, it doesn't perform. So there are also some papers that have been reorganized according to difficulty or performance, which is quite nice to use if you're trying to build confidence back in your, maybe not the year 11, but back in your 9 or 10, if you do use fuller papers. Because Seeger's just alluded to it. It's about getting them on that confident, giving them a little bit of success, giving them some, which will give them some confidence. You get them on an upward spiral. So it might be worth looking at those, what they called reordered papers,
Yeah.
again on the Maths Emporium.
Mal's already mentioned it, the crossover or the common assessed items which appear on both of the exams. So the crossover, what we call the crossover, is that bank of maths that is in that tea-stained document that's both. All students need to know. The common assessed items is what ends up landing on those 2 papers, the foundation and the higher. So what we have seen in the past is a crossover topic, for example, a pie chart appearing on either just the foundation or just the higher in one sitting. So knowing the language, and it was interesting, my head teacher speaking to me earlier this week, or end of last week actually, saying the students are talking in this language now. They know what the crossover means. They're saying what the crossover is. No, we're not a foundation group. We're not the bottom group. We're a crossover group. We're following what's on both. And that kind of language is known within the students as well. And it is great to have those conversations again with students and your department to share it with the students to make sure that the language is the same across and everyone knows what to expect. Then it just makes that end game a little bit more clarity of what to expect. Yeah, you will see the same questions at the end, at the start of those 2 papers, and incidentally, they're the ones that the whole system starts with. They will work out those grade 4s and 5s by looking at those questions. So bringing in the conversations with the students, and then obviously up to those big juicy ones at the very, very end of the paper, those real big problem solving ones. So we've called it the overlap. It's the crossover. Mal's puts this together, and please don't think this is any kind of list to even share with students. This is more for you as a teacher to remember, actually, these are the kind of things that really are examinable. They're really confidently, they've been there over the years. They keep popping up. So simplifying expressions on the foundation paper, even up to including 2020, has cropped up 14 times. And again, this is not any kind of dictation to what to teach or when to teach it. This is just having in the back of your head conversations. Oh, this is a really common question. These kind of things crop up a lot in the exam. And more importantly, the ones the other end, not to ignore them, not to forget about them, but when they do crop up, actually, yeah, this is how they look. But we've only seen them a couple of times, and this is what they've looked like. It's those conversations again. It's knowing inside out the end game. This is not a cheat sheet or any kind of dictation of what to teach. This is more helping you fully understand those exams.
Yeah, it's not a list. It's not a topic list. It's not saying this is what you need to teach.
I'm just conscious of time. We've got a couple of minutes, but what we've got here is a very quick look at those common questions that crop up. They're the ones that were here over the summer. So we've got a frequency polygon question, Venn diagram this summer. There you go. That was what I've just been recently marking with students leaving it blank. you know what? I'm going to take this back to the teachers, and after what Mal's just said, I want them to put a guess in to show them they could guess and get some marks, but I want them to tell me this was a guess. So I want them to write at the bottom there, this is a guess, sir. So I'm going to tell them that. There you go. Every day's a school day. Paper 3, there is a note at the bottom. How would you teach this? That is session 4, I think it is, 3 or 4 actually, when we look at some key methods that myself and Mel that we've done. We've gone round the circle in all this pedagogy over the years, and we keep coming back to some same olds, and we're going to share those same olds with you on one of these sessions over the coming months, those methods and ideas. Great question, that one. We love teaching inverse proportion.
Love it. Love it.
The top end, that question there on the right really did cause a bit of a stink over the summer. Yes, my son did get it perfectly correct. Again, I'll talk about that later. But nonetheless, some great questions to know what you're aiming for. And I sat with a lad yesterday at the end of the day and went through, not that one, but one where it was the sign, it was a heptagon, and it was chopped off on one of the points at the top, and it was you given the area 30 centimetres squared, what's the length of the line that goes straight across, and it was basically a hidden sine rule and half AB sine C. And doing that and seeing his eyes light up when it brings in a bit of maths that he's seen, but not necessarily in that context before, was brilliant yesterday. And I'm very much normally at the 3, 4, 5 borderline, but this lad, it was lovely watching his eyes go when we were doing that yesterday. You can look at the guide of the assessments, which is in that document there. Again, you can get your hand on those through the I think they're in the Emporium as well as on the Pearson Maths webpage. And I suppose just summing up what myself and Mel are really in this last couple of minutes, we're what we call credible specialists for Pearson. We don't work for Pearson. We're seconded is a Wednesday, and I get this wrong every single time, but Mel's is either a Monday or a Friday, depending on what week it is, week A or B for Mel. Now, we're available on those days for obviously things like this, sessions, but also if you want to reach out for any support, any guidance, and you can even come into our school, see us, we can come to you, but please take our emails, keep in touch. We are there as an outreach. Obviously Seb, the team at Pearson, they've got an exam business to run there. We are the people that are teachers day in, day out with a foot with the exam guys. I'd love to say that we got any insight and any advanced information, but we don't. But we don't. We are literally there as the people on the shop floor with everyone else in this country as teachers, but with a bit of a direct line into the exam board. That's it. But please keep in touch with us.
So Irina, who asked about tiering, it's the kind of thing where we could have a conversation and talk to you about what we've done, not necessarily advice from the exam board, but specifically what we've done as case studies in the schools that we've worked in. And it's that kind of stuff, but it's coming from the point of view of what we've done in our, like I say, different places, not necessarily exam board advice, because they can't give that kind of advice. It's down to us as professionals to make those decisions. Happy for people to come in, have a conversation, email, whatever. So
if it works and we can make it work, myself and Mal have talked about this. It would be great if on a Wednesday, if it works, I come over with some guys, see Mal, or on a Friday, Monday, Mal comes over, sees me with some guys that want to see things in action, and any particular advice, and then we've got that utilising seeing some teaching, but also one of the credible specialists there. When we were
acting as a critical friend as well.
Yeah. But that's us done for session 1. I know Seb wanted to wrap up and speak to everyone at the end, but hope that's been helpful. It was the basics. It was setting out the stall, and then we've got the next 4 sessions over the coming months that we are looking forward to seeing all of you guys at.